Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. As you know, we're going through the Ten Commandments. We've been a little bit out of order, but this is the sixth commandment. And I will tell you first off, Leisha approached me and said, "I want to do this thing about the Ten Commandments, and I'm talking to people about doing this." I had just read The Pathways, and the very first article was by a former boss of mine, Chief Justice Norman Fletcher. And he wrote in here about how he had come to live out this commandment in relation to the death penalty. And so I said, yes, I'd like to talk about you shall not kill, and I'd like to talk about death penalty. And she said, well, I've talked to John Scott, and he wants to talk about guns. So maybe the two of you can get together, and I have to say I'm delighted that we have gotten together. But I would recommend this article to you, as well as this recently published book about a case for life, justice, mercy, and the death penalty that has just been published by our Episcopal diocese. So that's just a little bit about how I got here. Do you want to say how Leisha approached you and you came to this?
Well, when we started talking about the Ten Commandments, this one really jumped out at me because I've done a lot of personal introspection about my own firearms ownership and what that means to me and what I want to do in regard to my faith. And it was just something that I just immediately wanted to do it. So that's how I got here.
I came up, and I've said this before, in the Church of the Brethren, and it was a very pacifist church. And so sort of the death penalty was one of the things that they preached against. While I had that inside me, I have to say that, most of the years I have not really reflected all that much on the death penalty. I know when I am aware that an execution is happening that I am offended personally, because this is the state taking a life on my behalf. And so I think about that. Yeah, and I think about our logo here. If you take a look at that, we came up with the Plungers and the Packers because the current way that we carry out executions now with the lethal injection, and what we do and how we feel about the gun debate. I can't get past, when I think about the death penalty, the fact that, Jesus, the person who the Lord sent to us to talk to us about love and to change, I think, what was happening with God's people. They gave up a murderer was set free so that Jesus, an innocent man, would be put to death. And while that was what he came to do, to die for us, he also pardoned another person that was on the cross at the same time as him. I just, those kinds of things. Throughout our history, we have gone through lots of gyrations, trying to figure out how to kill people. We've had guillotines, we've had drawing and quartering, hanging, firing squads. We've done all kinds of things, all kinds of contortions in order to commit murder on behalf of our government. And our history, hanging in a firing squad here in this country was quite prevalent, but we decided that they didn't meet the cruel and unusual punishment measure that's in our Constitution, and so we looked at more benevolent ways. We looked at the gas chamber. We looked at the electric chair, and then these were found to be inhumane. And I read one story about a warden who said he would not carry out another execution after he watched a man gasp for breath in a gas chamber over 2 hours. And here we've had in Alabama a man who was on the gurney, stretched out with his arms as if he's on a cross, laying down. And for over 2 hours, they tried to inject the lethal potions into him and were not successful. They're trying to say it was not cruel and unusual. They apparently put a hole in his bladder, and he has other issues, and I don't know what's going to happen with him. Has anyone here ever visited Jackson, the place in our state where executions take out? No. Well, I have. About 12, 13 years ago, I was visiting there and was taken on a tour of the prison, which is a very clean place. They have a very sort of martial art, kind of, not martial art, but a military kind of discipline there. So they have people marching back and forth to do things. They have people who have jobs and cooks and everything. But while I was there, the warden asked the person I was with and myself if we would like to visit not only the place where executions take place, the room, but would we like to go visit the inmates on death row. And so we did. We could talk to them. They were all in, individual cells, and they only have, a small place that they can seat out. But, they can, and they can talk to you. And everyone that was on there, and I didn't know names, I didn't want to know names, everyone who was there had some little project or some little piece of art or something that they worked on that they wanted to show you. And the one that struck me the most was a young man who was 24 years old, and he had been on death row since he was 18. And I've never quite forgotten that young man, but I do not know if he is still there or not. I do not know if he's still living. But that, that has had an impact that I've carried with me. So we go on? You want to go?
It's your turn. We're going to go through Bible verses, right?
Yep.
That's what we wanted to start off with. Marla did a lot of studying about the first page, which is the one without our logo on it, the one that says the sixth commandment at the top. And
what I did was I looked through and found places where murder and commandments were included in the Bible, and looking at where those were and how those verses were put. I tried to put a little bit of context with some of them. There were a lot of places because murder is talked about a lot in the Bible, particularly in the Old Testament, not so much in the New, except I think there's a couple there that really show in the New Testament that what will happen is the murderers will have a second death, after the coming. So I think that in looking at those verses, I think it's very helpful to sort of center yourself and see what the progression has been and how we have looked at this as we have come down through the Jewish tradition into the Christian tradition.
All right. So we'll get started with our presentation. We're going to be very focused on these two issues, and so if anybody has any general comments about you shall not murder, we would like to give you that opportunity before we begin. Okay. You shall not commit murder. There's been a lot of debate over the translation of this commandment. Assumptions that we make in this talk are that Jewish law, old law, new law, pretty much all law allows for lethal force and protection of property and family. And that the old law and our law in the United States allows capital punishment for many offenses. In our case, only one offense, really. Maybe a couple, but.
In Georgia, there's 3.
Okay, there are 3. We're going to do this in panel format, so Marla's going to be able to, we might have some back and forth here. This talk is not about animals or any other A word, okay? And we're talking about the death penalty and the gun debate. The great commandment that is listed here, the Matthew 1, love your God and love your neighbor. Does the New Testament modify the 6th commandment in any way? Did Jesus change everything? So we're going to examine this question throughout our presentation. And Paul certainly thought so, because he said in Galatians, for the whole law is summed up in a single commandment, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. The other key question that we're going to explore is, who is you? Is you us individually? Is the commandment just talking to us individually? Or is it talking to the church? Or are we responsible, and do we need to really focus on society too? What is the law? Is the law for, in ancient times, the law in the Bible was the same as the law of the government. So maybe it's that. But who is you, and how far do we need to go? That's going to be a key question. I'll let Marla go through her slides.
Okay, talking about the death penalty. What we find as we study what's going on with capital punishment, the assumption is, for most people, that it is reserved for the most heinous of crimes committed. But when you dig deeper, you find that that's not the case. That it's very arbitrary on who actually gets the death penalty and then who actually dies. We find that a large majority of the victims in death penalty cases, and death penalty is given for murder, rape, and kidnapping in the state of Georgia. So those are the 3 things that people are, can be condemned to die here. Of the 55 people that are currently on death row, a little over half of those are minority, black, but almost 100% of the victims were white. And we find, as we look deeper into studies, that when the victim is black, very seldom is the death penalty sought, and even is less likely to get life without parole. The district attorneys just don't go for the same kind of punishment when the victim is black. And that's something we need to keep working on. The death penalty, we have 49 district attorneys in Georgia. They have sole discretion on pursuing the death penalty. And I will tell you that in particularly some of the rural circuits, they don't go for the death penalty, not because they don't believe it, it's because the cost to the county is too much, and they don't have the funds to do it.
Marla, in the counties where they're minority district attorneys, is there any difference? In other words, like Fulton County or DeKalb County?
I have not seen anything that says there are. I do know that our current district attorney, Paul Howard, has been very unsuccessful. He's gone for the death penalty a lot of times and been very unsuccessful in getting it. And that has to do with a whole lot of different things that are going on. When we talk about the lower socioeconomic class goes to death row, I mean, my good friend, Justice Fletcher, one of the things he did, worked on very hard while he was Chief Justice, was changed our indigent defense program in this state. And in order to provide attorneys for people in this lower socioeconomic group, you're still likely to get an untried attorney, someone with not very much experience, representing you. But it has gotten better. It's much better than it was. We, however, in Georgia are one of the only states, if not the only state now, that does not provide for legal representation during the appeal process. So you get the death penalty and you no longer have access to legal services. We do have some nonprofit groups and some others that work very hard to represent these people, but their resources are small and they're focused mostly on those people who are more imminent as far as their death penalty date. And this is something that I think we really have to think about sitting here in Georgia. 72% of the executions since 1976 have occurred in the 11 former slaveholding states of the old Confederacy. They say this is because lynchings and executions were routinely employed as methods of racial control for many years. And this statistic about the Civil War, 87% of those executed in Mississippi were African Americans, and the rest of the Southern was 80%. So this is something we really have to keep in mind when we're thinking about the death penalty, I think. Where are we in that debate? Death penalty is a costly affair. People think, it costs a lot more to keep them in prison, but that's not true. And what's happening with the death penalty is you're keeping them in prison a long time, and you still have all the cost of because they're mandatory appeals, there's lots of different things that go into it. I know court reporters who have made upwards of $200,000 off a transcript on a death penalty case. And they can hold that transcript hostage for payment. And you cannot move forward with your appeal without the transcript.
When the DA you talked about earlier that seeks it a lot, that really adds to the cost. When it's not successful, it's still very, very expensive.
Yes,
so,
he has very satisfied court reporters in Atlanta.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of court reporters that are friends. I've worked with them very much in my former life. But there were problems with the system. But less than 1% of the cases are death penalty cases in the state. But they absorb over 10% of the judicial branch budget and have in some years been up to 30% of it. It's amazing. Our death row inmates are in jail an average of 14 years if you're executed. Currently, there are 55 UDPs, is what they call them, the under death penalty people. The oldest conviction was May of 1976. He was 22 years old when he was sentenced. The newest one, the latest one, is March of 2014. And last year, 3 came off death row. 1 was executed, 1 died, and 1 had a commuted sentence to life without parole. So once you get there, it's not real easy. We do know that there have been, since the Innocence Project has come about, there have been 156 people exonerated, some of those posthumously.
Is that just in Georgia? Or
That's a nationwide. I'm sorry, I should have been more clear about that. So things like the Innocence Project, which has found, this is something, we talk about it being a deterrent. And Thurber Baker, who I liked very much when he was Attorney General, he was full of doubts when we stopped using the electric chair, that the judges were going to be light on these people. I will tell you another Attorney General who had just become the Attorney General when I came to Georgia and started working in the courts was Michael Bowers. And I like Michael Bowers too. I worked with him on several different things. But the first time I saw him, he came to talk to a judge's convocation. And with shining eyes, he promised the judges that there would be an execution that year. And I remember just going, and I came to know him and respected him a lot. But there's a lot of people that just really have this. One of the things that's happened across the country is that there are states now, 19 states have done away with the death penalty. They don't have it at all. And there's a lot of fear that more cops would be murdered, murders would go up. None of that's happened. None of that's happened. In fact, in some, it's gone down. Crime rate has gone down. I think you're going to talk about that some more.
Mm-hmm.
When we execute an inmate in Georgia, they tell the inmate that they've been condemned to die by the people of Georgia. So when we talk about who is the you, who is the you? There's some studies about the executioners. They have psychological burdens. When I visited the prison, Jackson, the warden there was getting ready to oversee the 10th execution in his career. And he said, and I'm retiring after that because I can't do it anymore. Oh, the other thing while I was there, they had 3 plungers. And 2 of them were things that if you stopped there, the person wouldn't die. The 3rd one, whatever the cocktail was at that time, was the one that did it. But the 3 people who were pushing those plungers didn't know which was which.
Oh, that's interesting.
I thought that was a very interesting thing.
Sounds like a fire. Oh, God, excuse me, Jim. I am so sorry that I pour on you.
That's all right. Take a quick break. So on the gun debate, we're really passionate about this one right now. And this has been about, I don't know, I've had nights where I didn't sleep very much thinking about this presentation, so here we go. This gun will kill you. This is the thing that my dad told me when I was young. And I still say it every time I pick up a gun. If I'm going to the range and I'm taking my gun out of my gun safe, I think, even though I know, and I put it in there loaded, I put it in there unloaded, I say this gun will kill me, and I look at it and make sure it's unloaded. This is a phrase that we use in my family, that we're going to talk about the difference between this and another phrase that people use. Any gun is devastating when in the wrong hands and in the wrong places. Any gun. And I don't want to mince words about that. I think this is one of the misconceptions of the gun debate. So we talk about the AR-15, which is really a hunting rifle made to look like an assault rifle, and it only shoots one time when you pull the trigger. The bullet has a higher velocity than a pistol does, but there are lots of variables with pistols too. Like you can get frangible ammo, home defense ammo that breaks up as soon as it hits your body and shards go all over it. The bullet may be a higher velocity than a pistol, but the same rate of fire is achievable with a pistol. A lot of people don't know that. They think an AR-15 is a machine gun and it goes, but it doesn't. You can shoot at the same rate with a pistol, and if you have enough in the pistol can be very devastating. And somebody who knows how to use one can really wreak havoc. And especially if they have extra, anybody who attempts to, anybody can kill a lot of people. And thank goodness the shotgun isn't cool. Do you see this shotgun shell, this double-aught buckshot has 6 pellets in it. So, Grandpappy's old shotgun fired in the crowd can maim or kill several people, particularly if you take a hacksaw to it. Okay? So shotguns are serious, and they can injure and kill lots of people. So, one of the things that I just want to clear that up because there's a lot of polarizing debate going on. Any gun is going to be a problem in a school or in a place where they're not welcome. Okay? So let's go into the debate, right? We're going to start with our anti-gun, and I tried to distill this down into as few points as possible so I don't go crazy, okay? But more guns, more deaths by gun. So we have had generally a decline in crime and homicide and things of that nature. But there are still, the more guns that are in the populace, more guns owned by Americans, the more deaths there are by gun as a proportion of deaths. So if you look at the CDC statistics on deaths, is where I'm coming from, and then you look at the number of firearms. As the number of firearms goes up, the deaths by homicide go up, or the deaths by gun go up. Cause of death by gun, not necessarily a certain type of gun death. All right? Suicides, they're a double-digit percentage cause of death in young people. All right? Half of those suicides between 11 and 45 are by gun. And now, if you look at the suicide rates of different countries, we're not the worst. We're probably average. It's just that half of them are by gun. How good could we be, right? That's what I think when I look at those statistics. It's not that we're any worse than anybody else necessarily, but the fact that half of them are by gun, and this is a very, very convenient way to do it. The Harry Potter rule. This is what Leisha was alluding to. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, I don't know how many of you have seen the movies. Harry Potter's going after Bellatrix Lestrange. She just killed his godfather, Sirius Black. And he's chasing her, and he's so angry, and he hits her with one of the unforgivable curses called the Cruciatus Curse, and he goes, Crucio! And the spell shoots out of his wand, and it hits her, and she just laughs at him and goes, ha ha ha! You have to mean it! Right? Well, don't you wish guns were like that, right? If it doesn't matter whether you mean it or not. If you pull the trigger and it's pointed in the right direction, it's going to be devastating. The U.S. has 5% of the world population. This statistic really ticks me off. But 35% of the mass shootings. I'm sure they're excluding war zones, okay? But this is crazy. So that's our anti-gun side. Here's our pro-gun side. Common phrase, guns don't kill people, people kill people. And I think this is true when there's intent behind the firearm. Okay? When there's somebody actually actively shooting, wanting to shoot the gun. All right, but if you go back a little bit, this is what I was taught, okay? This gun will kill you. And if it's in the wrong hands, a child, someone impaired, someone with impaired judgment or whatever reason, I'm not sure that the gun doesn't have something to do with it. I agree that when there's intent behind the crime, this is probably true, but it incites a lot of, what do you want to call it? Passion, let's call it for now. All right. U.S. overall violent crime rate is sharply lower. This is true. Very true. In fact, it was something like, I was reading today, in the 1970s, we had 8,000 crimes per, this is overall crime, not just violent crimes, but 8,000 per 100,000 people. Now we have something like 3,000 per 100,000 people. It has gone way down. And a lot of people want to credit, like gun nuts want to credit guns for this. But there's been a lot of factors over 25 years. Last time I checked, we had something called the technology revolution. It may have changed this a little bit, okay? Lots of cameras, lots of technology to protect different places, lots of ways to get caught that didn't exist before. And not to go into the adultery conversation again, but there's also lots of freely available pornography on the internet. I wonder if that has any effect on the rate of rapes and other types of muggings that might be sexually oriented. Maybe, maybe not. I'm just taking a guess at a lot of different reasons why the crime rate is sharply lower. It's not just because the gun ownership rate is so high. However, that will have something to do with it. Threat of death by gun is ultimate deterrent, and theft in homes when nobody's home is very, very low in the United States. This is true, all right? And this is a pro-gun point. The Second Amendment. Okay, anybody remember the Branch Davidians? All right. I didn't go back and review the case, so I probably can't come up with all the reasons why they committed crimes, but I seem to remember that the actual crimes committed by this group was quite low, and they didn't necessarily do anything wrong, but the government was so concerned about the people that were kidnapped maybe inside, and that they had stockpiled a lot of weapons, okay? And their right to bear arms against tyranny was met with lethal force by the government. I mean, if you think you really can stand up to the U.S. government, well, that doesn't exist anymore. Now, and wars are perpetrated with planes and bombs and things like that, right? So I'm not sure the tyranny argument really holds up. Property protection, now that's been in our law for, since biblical times and before. So, I think that, and that is the history. Property protection is the history of the language of our Second Amendment, part of it. It's kind of a holdover from English law. And I'm not going to go down a rat hole here, but to stop a bad guy with a gun, you need a good guy with a gun. We've heard that a lot lately. And I'm not sure that's true. I don't like this one, and I wish that we weren't having to talk about. We were just talking about how we have to talk about guns in schools to our child because they're going to have drills in her school. She's in elementary school. I hate having this type of conversation. And Marla, I think you brought up when we were practicing something. You want to about teachers.
Oh,
You asked me whether I wanted teachers to have them.
yes.
And the answer is, I wish we weren't having this conversation, really. I don't think that's a good idea necessarily. I do like the idea of the air marshal that nobody knows is a passenger and has a gun on him. Because I think when you put too much force around a school and it's visible, then it can make certain students, particularly minorities, very uneasy. And
I wonder how the teacher can keep the gun accessible without it being accessible to children. I mean, I just don't.
Yeah, even if it's in a concealed holster, the kids would know. Yeah, I totally agree with you on
And
that.
if it's locked up, then is there time to get it? I mean, I don't know, but I do know, I heard today that there've been over 600 threats of things like what happened in Florida. Since Florida, that people have, made threats that they would go to a school and do that. I mean, it's scary.
What's next? I can't even remember. Oh yeah, on the macro level, we're too polarized. So one of the reasons why I did that introduction is because I think one of the things that's not productive about the gun debate is that the pro-gun side feels that if you take away one thing, that just sets the precedent for taking away something else, which really isn't necessarily true. But the gun debate is symptom focused. So when you talk about the bad guy with the gun, that's a symptom. That's not the root issue. How did the bad guy get the gun? What made the bad guy bad? Like, we've got lots bigger fish to fry in society than just focusing on the bad guy with the gun. Like, if that's the way we're going to treat everything, then we're just going to be reactive to an issue that is very deep, really. And if you want to take away all the guns, that's an admirable stance. I think that could work. It's just like how and at what cost. Because the gun is actually one of the problems and the widespread availability of guns. I'm going to go into this in a little bit, how bad guys get guns. But this is one point. Everybody but the NRA is cool with background checks. I mean, the majority of Americans support more background checks and gun registrations. And the NRA, I just got a thing last night from them. A long time ago. They're like the Mormon Church. I was a member of the NRA when I was really young, and then they followed me everywhere I've gone, every address I changed. So it's like, but I got a survey that basically was like, the media outlets believe that the majority supports, registrations. What do you think? And we're going to throw this data in their faces and stuff. And I just wanted to send it back with a big screw you all over it. But anyway.
This is one thing in Connecticut, they did pass after the Sandy Hook thing. They passed very stringent laws on background checks and registration. Every gun has to be registered that you have.
Yeah.
And in fact, gun sales are up.
Gun sales didn't go down. It didn't hurt. It didn't hurt the industry.
But
Right.
the statistics of gun violence is down there.
Right.
So,
and the other thing is, we have all this technology. We're okay with name the retailer, right? We're okay with Amazon knowing all our preferences and Google having all this data about us. And we're okay with the IRS having our bank accounts so that they can, ACH us our transfers when scam artists use that same data all the time to steal all our money. And we're okay with all that information being in the hands of the government. But if we give them information about our firearms, somehow that doesn't work well. We're in the 21st century, people. Like, why can't we use data to solve problems? It's ridiculous how, you want to track a gun from a crime to where it was purchased, and sometimes they have to go back to paper records. They have to go to the manufacturer, who then has to find out what lot it went to the wholesaler, and the wholesaler has to find out which retailer they sent the box to, but none of it's on a unified computer system. I mean, it's absolutely insane. Causes. Maybe the government can help this, maybe us too. The male brain isn't fully developed until 23. We're sitting here throwing out 21. What is that? That's just the drinking age, right? Okay? We're going to raise the gun, the age to purchase a gun to 21, and maybe certain types of guns. I don't care, but why not just be scientific? Why are we so arbitrary? Like, hey, let's do it, And, when I was young, there were people I knew who had their hunting rifles in their cars, and you're able to carry them around when you're 16. But a lot of those people were actual hunters, and they had no intent other than to hunt. But, I'm okay with it. Like, come on, let's be scientific. Let's go after, like, the real data and when somebody's frontal lobe is actually developed, okay? So we can go after societal issues and mental illness, like, whether your stance, or whether you're on the left or on the right politically, right? The church, we do this stuff, okay? We work with people in bad neighborhoods. We work on poverty. We try to minister to people who are lonely and depressed. We try to band together as a community and keep ourselves healthy. We want to, be involved in whatever charities. I know this group, and I know we all do things outside of church charities too. We're all, but, maybe we can make a difference. And then individually, secure your guns, secure your guns, secure your guns. I've gotten to where I just go straight from home to the range and back home because I'm afraid that my guns are going to get stolen. So you say, oh, I'm a law-abiding gun owner. Don't penalize law-abiding gun owners. Well, how many guns fall into the wrong hands because they were stolen out of a vehicle, stolen out of a home? We just had friends across the street get their house broken into while nobody was home. And they went through, it was weird because they didn't take a lot of the high dollar items just sitting out, but they went through the closet. What do you think they were looking for? Right? Guns. Guns. Secure your guns. And I can't talk enough, there's not enough time to really get into it, but we don't talk about guns with our kids. We don't talk about death with our kids. We don't talk about death with each other. There are too many video games, first-person shooters, things on the internet that kids are exposed to with no other conversations. We're letting somebody else take the lead and tell and set the imagery, set the conversation. And we've got to start doing more and I advocate, I'm going to take my children hunting. I'm going to teach them about guns. But more, even if they don't like that, the more, the reason to do it is that they'll know how deadly they are. And I've already talked to Julia, and I may have talked to Henry, but Henry's a little young, but trying to get them to understand that if they're at somebody else's house, they can leave. They have my permission. And if there's a gun that a child is in possession of and there's not a parent around, you can go out of the house, okay? And go to the neighbors. It's okay. Do it. Get out, all right? But personal opinions. I started out in my life very pro-gun, very libertarian, and I've obviously tempered that a lot. But I'm still pro-gun in a lot of ways. And Marla is anti-gun, and I think, Marla, you would probably take all the guns, wouldn't you?
I don't know that I would take all the guns. Personally, I do not want a gun. I never want to have a gun. And, my husband feels the same way. We don't have that. We know people who hunt, who shoot, skeet, and trap. And, they get a lot of fun out of that. But the problem is too many guns in too many places. And how we can come to that. I very much think that we need to have very strong background checks, and all of our weapons ought to be, and I do think it's weapons, they should be registered. We should know where they are and be able to track them.
Why not?
It's just, it doesn't make any, I'm with John on that, it doesn't make any sense to me that we can't know that information, that it, how that impinges on the Second Amendment, I cannot fathom.
Yeah, so, we respect each other's opinions, and John 13:35, they'll know you as my disciples because you love each other. So I think one of the problems right now with the polarization in our country is, the people saying that they're, on our side as Christians may not be. We have no compassion for the other side. We really don't. And they'll know us in our churches because we can argue about it. Like, I had an argument with Meryl last week about it, right? And I love arguing with Meryl. I would do that again and again. She's one of my favorite people. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is what we're supposed to do that. We're supposed to do this with each other. This is what we're supposed to do. And, I love all y'all anyway, regardless of where you stand on any of this stuff. And that's the difference, right? And I think we got to carry that into the world because nobody's going to listen to us if we don't. The Second Amendment doesn't mean much to me if my child is killed at school. I mean, that's the truth. If I knew that it would make a difference, I would give my guns up right now. All right. Does God want us to go further? Love your enemies. So in Matthew, Jesus says, well, even this group over here loves, even criminals love their friends, loves their family, right? Even non-Christian law-abiding gun owners abide by the law. And even a lot of countries think capital punishment's good. What makes us different as Christians? Right? Are we called? And I think, should God's priority be our priority? So we have the parable of the lost sheep. After 9/11, I had this, there was a interim rector at St. Bartholomew's that I can't remember the name of. It was a very difficult Sunday, of course. It was terrible. And there was so much anger and sadness. And he basically got up and said, look, folks, you gotta understand what's going on here. Like, basically, you're going to be surprised who's in heaven, right? God, you think God cares about us and is going and is helping, and he does. But, when he's also vigorously pursuing all of the terrorists, all the criminals, all the people who aren't in the fold. I mean, God spends, if the parable is correct, God spent a lot of energy on the lost sheep in society. And, maybe we should too. Maybe we shouldn't necessarily just say, hey, well, I'm good. I did my part. All I did, I secured my guns, and I'll never have anything. I didn't murder anybody. I don't care about those people, right? Should we be ready to forgive versus being ready to pull the trigger or push the plunger? Who is you? And the other thing I know, our lives, to me, are like a buzzer beater. It's about to be March Madness. Does everybody like a good buzzer beater? Where a team wins at the last second? Well, our lives are like that. I've been thinking about the 10 Commandments a lot, and there's probably not a 5-minute period that goes by where I don't have some kind of sinful thought, or 2 or 10, right?
You and Jimmy Carter.
Right, okay. So, but we're sending up to the last second. And, for a lot of us, maybe God's having to sink a free throw and we're done, right? But for a lot of people, he's lobbing basketballs from all the way down the court on the other baseline. And he doesn't care. He doesn't care if he goes for it on a Hail Mary pass on 4th down on his own 1-yard line. That's the way God is. And he can come back in a game, if you're comparing lives to a game. When you're down, when God is down infinity minus 1 to 0, he can score infinity on the last play. Right?
John, I'd like to, when you're talking about that, there was a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I'd like to.
Yeah, dude.
Yes. He was interviewed for Ebony magazine in November of 1957. He was asked, do you think God approves the death penalty for crimes like rape and murder? He responded, I do not think that God approves the death penalty for any crime, rape and murder included. Capital punishment is against the better judgment of modern criminology and above all against the highest expression of love in the nature of God. And when I found that quotation, I just really, it just speaks to me very deeply. Martin Luther King Jr.
So, I think we're called to struggle with this. We can't, there's a lot of anger when things happen, and there's no way we can just love everybody. We can try, but it's not gonna really, you can't really do it. You know, it's just not, this is not easy stuff.
No, it's not.
And we don't have to have the same answer about any of this stuff, you know? But we do need to think about it and maybe figure out something we can do that fits within our comfort zone, I guess, or our discomfort zone, whatever. But a wise person can change their mind, a fool never does. Well, that's something my grandfather used to tell me, and I believe it. I believe that we live life to change our minds. Like, the world changes, we change, everything changes. Our minds can really change. It's not that hard, but it is hard. I don't know. This is fun. Thank you very much. So what I want to do is let's talk about at the end here things that we can do. And that's it. Thank you for your attention. Is there anybody?
The thing I know about people that have guns, and I know people that have 20 and 30 guns, and is they just love them. And it's like the more guns they have, and they're not getting ready to kill anybody, they just love the guns, and a lot of them are left-wingers. They're, you know, they're not, I'm not sure it's right to make this a left-right issue, because the people that I know that own the most guns are all, I would describe as, you know, hardcore liberal Democrats.
Oh, I agree. There's a lot of gun-toting liberals, and I was trying to frame it as pro-gun, anti-gun, not necessarily Republican and Democrat, because I agree with you.
One thing that you didn't talk about, though, that is, if you make a mistake and you have somebody executed for crime and later found out you made that mistake, you can't undo that mistake.
Cannot undo that.
And there are always mistakes, and you know, people go back into the past and they say, oh, this was something that was just clear cut, except that one or two of the witnesses said, well, we really didn't see it all that well, but we make mistakes, and in the case of capital punishment, we can't make a mistake.
The statistics are about 4 to 5% are for sure innocent. And
That's all?
that's all. That's you know, when you talk about getting statistics on this and how many actually get the scrutiny to actually find out if they're innocent is a small number. But right now, I mean, to me, even one is too many. And one of the people that is writing in the book talks about representing 11 different people on death row, and of those, he knew that 4 were innocent. One of them, he was able to get exonerated. 2, I believe, he was able to get commuted to life without parole, and the 3rd was executed. So, yeah, I mean, it's very hard, very difficult. And I have another thing. If we're convicting people that are innocent, and we don't have the resources with Indigent Defense and Act, you know, to represent people appropriately, if people are taking life without parole in order to avoid the death penalty, then their cases aren't getting scrutinized. So we've got innocent people there too, probably in larger numbers, but it's just a very difficult situation. And juries don't want to convict anymore on death penalty that much. We haven't had a death penalty in Georgia since 2014, March of 2014.
Is there any kind of serious move in Georgia to change the law?
There are a lot of people who work on this, but you can't get legislators much interested. They don't want to appear to be soft on crime. And, you know, it's an election year this year, so it's not, and you don't see anyone out there championing this and saying, you know, I'm going to run because I want to do away with this. And, you know, of course, the judges, they can't be involved in that kind of discussion at all.
Are there any southern states where it's been outlawed?
No, not yet. But one of the things that happened in Harris County, Texas, there's several places where death, there's been a lot of death penalties. In Harris County in Texas is Houston. So they've had a large number over the years. The prosecutor that was just elected there last year, I guess, 2016, he ran on promise not to seek the death penalty. And so there's light. When you look at those kinds of things happening. If people who are sitting on a jury have the option of life without parole, that's an easier thing to do, I think, than the death penalty. The one sad statistic is that it's not the Christian part of us that's moving this so much as the cost and and the fact that the government might not be doing such a good job and might be convicting innocent people. So you've got the liberal. This has been generally a liberal cause, but you've got the conservatives coming together because they don't like big government, and so the two are coming together on this issue. So, and of course our bishop, he's one of the authors in this little book, and he's very much opposed to the death penalty. Just so you know.
What is the status of the juvenile court system, detention system, et cetera? Has that improved? There was a lot of talk about that several years ago, but have we seen significant progress?
We have seen significant progress, and one of the things that happened about 20 years ago or so, they had this whole thing about trying a juvenile as an adult, and they determined that at age 13 could be tried as an adult. So that caused a lot of really bad things to happen because these juveniles are being put in the adult system. They weren't being educated. There wasn't, there were 7 deadly sins that they could be charged as. But the juvenile system as a whole, they have been working on, and they have been working on this pipeline to prison through the schools. There have been some really active judges in that effort. So there have been a lot of forward movement, and I feel it's gotten a lot better. And I know the juvenile court judges themselves are, working hard in that area. No discussion?
Anybody?
I can't imagine how I could hide anything in my house, anywhere under how many locks and keys, that the children wouldn't be able to find it better than I could.
Exactly. Yeah, I didn't say that part, but I keep mine very far away from children.
Do you have one of those big safes?
I have a gun locker in my basement, and then I lock the key for that in a toolbox that has a lock and key. And that's locked in the basement where somebody has to get the house key to get in the basement.
So if a bookman was trying to get in your house, he'd be in there and kill you all before you get all those keys out.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's true.
Well, the thing is that I believe that there's another, so we had a break-in across the street. I'm about to put in cameras. My philosophy basically is to try to set the perimeter where I find people maybe casing my house before something like a burglary occurs. And second, I hope that there's some other way. And if there were robberies when somebody was home, maybe I would consider keeping my gun in the house. But at the same time, I don't agree. This is one thing that I forgot to say, and I can't believe I forgot. But I don't agree with necessarily the phrase "shoot first, ask questions later." Now, if there's an intruder in your house, and you've already got the gun in your hand, and they seem to have lethal force, then you kind of maybe have to do that. But that seems like way down the road as to, did I try to detect the intruder well before they got there? Did I try to voice threaten? Did I try to do this and that? I mean, I want to think of some other way, because as teaching children, for example, I used to go. And I think a lot of children, one of my points about children not ever seeing death is, hunting as a child. I of course, harvested some game, both birds and larger animals. And, watching something die isn't a whole lot of fun. And to imagine that as a person and imagining it in my living room or something, just makes me I don't want that to happen. So, it
And
really
you've
would be
heard
like,
horrible stories about people who hear something and they shoot, and it turns out to be their child coming home.
Like
that They weren't
critters.
expecting.
Their spouse.
Their spouse,
The
yes.
police have told Jeff and me that the best deterrent you can have is a dog, not a gun.
yeah, exactly, because they won't come in,
Yeah.
Or they get deterred.
The dog will wake
Dogs
you
are
up if it's in the
sensitive.
middle of the night and there's someone, coming into the house. And as far as things we can teach our children, I think we have a lot of complacent folks in this country because it's never discussed with them. Parents don't talk about the criminal system and the death penalty and, how fair is it to do this or how just is it? It's hard to talk about moral issues. Kids often have more questions than I can answer, but at least they're thinking about it. And I think we set a good example if we let our kids know what's going on. Often, young kids have a real strong reaction to the idea of the death penalty, and it ain't positive. So why not teach them young that maybe there's other things that can be done?
Yeah. My daughter Julia got bored after the second slide when I started to show it to her. But her first reaction to the death penalty was, "That's mean."
Yes, sir.
A lot of the mouths are big.
I can't get over that, the way they lay them out.
I think that's cruel and unusual. If it were me, I would far rather face a firing squad.
Well, the guy in Alabama had, because they knew he didn't have good veins, because he's been ill and all kinds of problems. He asked to be given something orally, and they wouldn't do it.
They wouldn't do it?
They're even talking about using fentanyl, because, drug companies won't sell them the drugs anymore, and so they're looking at other concoctions. So fentanyl, the bad thing that's causing heroin addicts to overdose and die, they're looking at using that now as part of the cocktail. I mean, we go to such lengths to murder. It's just incredible to me. It's incredible to me. I don't think that's what Jesus came to do. I don't think when he said love one another that he gave any exceptions. And I just can't feel good about murder.
Well, if it were my child though, and somebody had just raped and murdered my child, I wouldn't wait. If they were in my sights, I'd pick up a gun and shoot them, because I don't want that to happen to anybody else's child.
I don't want
And
that to
it's
happen
just,
either.
it's so remote from the event, the way we do this, that it just, and obviously you can't be a vigilante, but this is a really hard.
It is hard.
It's a
It's
hard
not.
question.
It's not easy. I know it's not easy.
That's why I'd have to ask my
I've
church.
never
Wondering
faced.
something, you're always talking about from the inmate standpoint, but have you ever met a person who lost a relative?
There are a lot of groups that support the victims, and there are victims that are, part of the problem that happens with this, the system the way it is now, while we're going after the perpetrator, the alleged, person, and most of the time I do think they have the right person. But the victims get re-victimized because they have to go back to all these court hearings. They have to go through all this time and time and time again.
What I'm asking is,
And-
have you ever met a
Yes.
person who lost their relative to
Yes.
murder?
Yes,
Yeah.
I've worked with victims too. So I know, finding that place, once the person's gone, then where's the victim left? And I find that there's still hollows there. Doesn't bring back the person. And I've just seen so much re-victimization. We need to be much more supported in other ways. We need to get, the person that caused the problem. I am not saying that people should get to walk free, but when someone goes into the prison system at 22 years old and they're 60, they're not the same person anymore. And what are we doing? So, there's just so many problems with
What
that.
about abolishing parole or probation or holding people in jail without bail until the trial is held? What about, getting rid of plea bargaining?
You know, in,
What about, just raising your kids better so you don't have things like
now,
out of
there's the
wedlock
thing,
births
there's the
or
thing.
domestic violence?
Our
or
Christian
drug
values,
abuse?
we need to inculcate those and work on those much harder. And, you know, I think it's something we may not talk about enough. Even with our children, talking about those Christian values.
There are about 300 million guns in this country and they've been in this country for hundreds of years. It's not the guns that change, it's the people that change with the rap music and all the other garbage, the violent video games and movies and TV shows.
Absolutely, go for the cause, the root cause.
And, you know, it's the deadbeat dads that aren't taking care of their kids, it's the teen pregnancies, it's just that it takes so much money to pay for the mortgage that both parents have to work, and then there's nobody at home to raise the kids. And, you know, so it's just, you know, that kind of stuff. It's just, they ought to stop having these out of wedlock births and stop paying people, the government should stop paying people to have babies out of wedlock. Because they ought to just get two-parent families raising their kids and having both, even if they have to work to make money, that would help lower the poverty rate. But I just think it's more like how you raise your kids to prevent the murder. I don't think that you're gonna stop crime by taking away my guns and making it easier for a crook to attack me. I've been seeing a lot of videos on YouTube where there are a lot of criminals, I hate to talk about it being disproportionately black, but they're the ones that commit the most crime. And they will have 20 or 30 people ganging up on one person. There was one video up in Baltimore, Maryland, where a 62-year-old man was at his house, minding his own business. Two teenage black girls were fighting each other near his car on his property, in his driveway. He merely told them to leave his property and stop fighting. A gang of 51 people, mainly teenagers and people in their 20s, came back and beat him nearly to death. They gave him brain damage, 2 broken eye sockets, 2 black eyes, broken ribs, cuts and bruises, vision loss, and hearing loss. They nearly killed that man. If he had had a gun to defend himself, he could have not gotten so much injuries, you know. So I just think it's really ridiculous to say that you're going to stop criminal attacks by making it easier for a criminal to attack somebody who can't defend themselves.
Well, now this brings up tangentially something that was in the paper last Sunday, and I think it's been in the news recently because of that shooting in Florida. And that is that sometimes people have mental issues, like those 2 girls. There could have been a lot going on with them that man didn't know about when he approached them. It needs to be easier to get people into treatment than it is now. You know,
There need to be resources so that we have treatment.
Yeah, but what are you gonna do about those people on the lawn though? Somebody's gotta get them off the property maybe. Maybe you just wait till they leave, let them make as much racket as they want.
Well, you got to get rid of the games. You got to get rid of the game problem. You ought to look at some of these videos by calling Flaherty on Lines.com as well as on his Facebook page. He's written books like Don't Make the Black Kids Angry and White Girl Bleed a Lot. And those videos will turn your stomach because there's just so much violence. And just because you take guns away from people doesn't mean you're going to stop killing. Criminals are now setting people on fire. Now, I would rather have a gun to be able to defend myself if somebody's going to do that. Now, I know I can wear what I'm currently wearing right now, which are long johns, which are fire retardant. Now, I'll wear that, not because I'm a paranoid person, but because, well, if I encounter a criminal like that, I'm glad I got something that protects me. Of course, it can also protect me from any other cause of a fire, such as electrical fire. I don't walk around paranoid thinking I'm going to get burned to death every day of my life. I don't think that way. But that's not enough. Sometimes you just need a gun to defend yourself. You can learn all the karate you want, but if 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 people are coming after you in this mob violence, it's just not gonna always work, this hand-to-hand combat. I mean, you can learn the martial arts, I'm not against it. You can carry these tactical flashlights, you can learn the counter-knife techniques, you can have the tasers, you can have stuff like that, you can have a protective breed of dog by your side, and of course you can improve your home security of at your home or your school or your business, or your church or whatever, synagogue or whatever, but I don't think that's always enough. And there have been just ridiculous things going on. And what you said about the pipeline to prison thing on the schools, what happened during the Obama administration was they were taking the kids that were committing crimes, including violent felonies at schools, and they were telling them, we're not going to arrest them, we're going to assign them to social workers. Well, the social workers don't solve the problem. They kept having people in Broward County telling everybody, including people in that school where that guy went to in Florida,
Well,
not to arrest that guy.
That's not the statistic in Georgia.
And then he ended up shooting the
what they're
people.
doing.
I want to tell